Trigger warning for sexual assault. The main reason why I'm talking about this show and the reason why I really don't like it is because the way it normalizes and romanticizes sexual assault. So if that is something that really bothers you, I will not personally be looking at it in a positive light. It's strictly negative in this video. But if something talk about that bothers you, or just hearing about it bothers you, then you should click away. And I highly recommend not watching the show either because the amount of romanticizing of sexual assault it has is truly offensive. Thank you. Hi, I'm a bargain bin Chris Evans who thinks sexual assault just isn't cool. Leo, and welcome to In Bed with a BL. Today, we are going to be dragging and talking about Love Stage.
Get her, Jay!
I will only be talking about the anime. I will not be talking about the OVA, the manga, or the live action movie that apparently came out in October of 2020. The main reason why I'm bringing this up, I was planning on doing a movie about this earlier because when I think of just like a terrible anime that came out a long time ago and I find to be like really offensive for gay people, I think of this one. So I was going to talk about it anyways. But Thailand is going to be releasing a series based on the manga or anime, I'm not quite sure. And so that gives me like palpitations because if they don't cut like a lot of the content of the anime, it's going to be like really tragic because when you see this kind of stuff in live action, it's horrible. There's actually a Japanese movie called Fujimi Orchestra, which I also think is an adaptation of a manga, and it's live action, and the sexual assault, lovemaking, romance scene is so cringy and horrifying, especially with real people, and like seeing real people like panic on their face as somebody is like doing horrible sexual things to them, it's just not cute. So it's not cute when it's in a comic book, a graphic novel, or an anime either, but seeing it with actual people is pretty horrible. So hopefully they cut out almost half the content of the anime, and then it will be bearable. So for Love Stage, the only 4 characters that really matter right now are Izumi, Ryoma, Rei, and Shogo. Izumi and Ryoma are like the main couple. Rei is the manager and Shogo is the brother. And then you have like couple, kind of. In the anime, Rei and Shogo are only hinted at like at the very end, and which is weird because they're probably the more healthy option, and maybe if we focused on them, this would be much better. But we're gonna mostly talk about Izumi and Ryoma because the story's about them, and all of the terrible things that Ryoma does because he is rich and pretty, so it's okay. Before I talk about the things I don't like, it's always in good taste to talk about the things I do like. And the show does have some good qualities, but the bad parts about it aggressively outweigh the good qualities, so they don't really matter in the end. Number 1, the story is kind of simple. It's nothing groundbreaking, but I always like the trope of like there's a childhood memory and they meet again as they're older and they can like go back to the memory and have fondness of each other. This happens in like a lot of things, like most notable, Love of Siam, which is the best movie ever made, has the 2 main characters knowing each other as children and then meeting when older. You also have like even things like Your Name, which like in the anime they meet younger and then there's time travel involved, stuff like that. But that trope is very interesting because I like when they can just be like, oh, I met you as a child, and oh, number 1 for you, that new Taiwanese drama that's coming up, that's really good, I highly recommend. I watched the first 4 episodes. That also has a twist where a character in that show knows another character from the past, but they don't really remember, or things like Two Moons also has that. So that trope, it happens a lot, and it's always interesting, and it's just cute. Number 2, the animation's fine. It's kind of cute. Everyone talks about Izumi's eyes, and they are really pretty. 3, it is kind of like a comedy, which is really weird because the main concept of this is sexual assault, which is never funny. But in 4 is the La La Lulu part. So the main character Izumi wants to be a manga artist, and every episode he has like a dream about La La Lulu, who is like an anime manga character he really loves. And it pretty much, he has like little snippet dreams about him interacting with her, and it talks about like what's happening in his life. And I thought that was like kind of fun. I don't know, I daydream all the time about things like that too. So that's a really cool premise, and if they kind of went more into that, I think that'd be really cool. But even though there are some good qualities of this, those only good qualities, if it was just that alone, would make this like a normal, forgettable anime. If this anime wasn't so tragically offensive, I probably would have forgotten about it anyways. Like, I only remember this because of how horribly how terribly they handled the concept of sexual assault. And it fits in the genre standard, like BL all the time, gay things is very common. Even in Western gay media, like sexual assault happens. It's never good. I think there's like some sort of like, I've spoken this about in like forums and stuff like that, but I think there's this concept of like, usually the writers and artists are women who are writing these romances for other women. So there's kind of like this gap of disconnect, where they're writing about something they don't really know. So maybe they don't fully understand how offensive it is. Like, think about like when men are writing women characters in stories and movies, like they put a lot of emphasis on how like women are walking with their boobs or weird like things like that. Like I remember reading Game of Thrones, and he said while Daenerys was dancing in the first book, her breasts moved like empty change purses, which that doesn't make any sense. So I think whenever anybody writes about something that they're not part of, there's always that layer of disconnect. So in like the goodness of my heart, I hope these people aren't trying to be offensive and they just don't know. And the clientele also isn't part of this world, so maybe they don't know either. But it's not good. It's pretty bad. And in general, I feel like since there's that layer of disconnect, sometimes they also don't consider gay people like real. And I think that's just like a common thread around the world where like gay people are maybe considered lesser. I don't know. So you have like two layers of disconnect where like gay people are just there for your enjoyment and they're not writing about something they know. So it's like they're just dolls, and with a doll you can do anything you want and there's no repercussion. And especially like when it's a cartoon or a drawing, they're definitely not people. So people can think about how it doesn't really affect anything. They're like, oh, it's just a cartoon, you can do XYZ to it. And that's kind of understandable. People defend certain things. Like when you watch a cartoon and there's like a 500-year-old dragon, but it's in the body of like a teenage girl. Like, is that really a teenage girl, or is it a 500-year-old dragon who knows everything? But like when people sexualize it, it's still kind of creepy that you're sexualizing a little girl. But if it's a cartoon, it's less bad. I don't know. I've had conversations with people all the time, and it's very strange. Like it's very confusing. So you kind of get into that bag of worms. So you kind of get into that can of worms conversation about this when you talk about BL, because there's so many things up in the air, and it's about personality and like, is it really offensive? Is it not offensive? Is it actually a bad thing? Is murder worse or not? I'm not gonna go like super deep into this concept because like I personally have never had like serious sexual assault upon me, so I don't feel super comfortable talking about the ins and outs of that. Like I've had my fair share of sexual harassment and things like that, but I don't feel totally comfortable enough like really getting heavy deep into it. But I'm going to talk lightly about how this subject matter could be offensive. And before we get into anything, I'm going to talk about personally like why I find sexual crimes, or just crime make it too legal, but sexual harassment or sexual bad things against somebody else so bad. Personally, like other things that are crimes or bad usually can be morally gray. Like you can accidentally kill a person to save your own life. You can steal to feed yourself, because like living and eating are things that you need to do to survive. Reproduction is something all living creatures do. As a species, you need to reproduce, but it's not essential for living. So there's almost no scenario where like sex is something you need to do or you're gonna die, or something horrible is gonna happen. Like sure, you can have an instance where like someone can have a gun to your head and be like, do this horrible sexual thing or I'll kill you. But you could input any variable into that, like, oh, go drink bubble milk tea or I'll kill you. So that's just like an outlier, it doesn't really matter. But there's never kind of a situation where like sex can solve a problem. So that's why personally I think it's never good, or like that type of badness is never good, and it's always like a selfish reason. So that's why I can personally demonize it more than if there's a character who murders or something like that. Sure, murder is also very bad, and we shouldn't really love that type of stuff either, and that's a whole other argument. But just in this general, that's like where I stand on that situation before we go further. Yeah, awkward, right? So we've mentioned this multiple times, but the glaring problem with this anime is the sexual assaults on Izumi. So Izumi is like the bottom character, we talked about this in Hello Stranger, where there's always like the top and the bottom, because that's how gay people work. There's just the input and the output situation that go together. He's the bottom, so therefore he is like the victim, and things have to happen to him. This show also not only has him like going through sexual assault through Ryoma, but his family kind of also is forcing him into things he doesn't like either. So he's just like this really pitiful character. So we already said earlier, he wants to be a manga artist, but he comes from like a wealthy family of artists, like musical artists and acting. I don't know why these two people hate like drawing and can't just pay for him to have a drawing class and then he can be like a good artist, because that's also a creative thing. But whatever. His mom and dad are complete trash anyways, and like they're like the parents from like Call Me by Your Name, who are just like way too wealthy and don't really care about anything that's going on, and they're just kind of like awkward parents. So they're not good parents, but they're like forcing him into this thing he doesn't have. So he has no control of his life in any way, shape, or form from his parents anyways. And then his sexuality, like the only thing that kind of is his own, is also being taken away from him by Ryoma, which is really tragic. In this series, there are 3 instances of assault to him. The first one happens on the end of episode 3 and the beginning of episode 1, where Ryoma finds out that his love of his life 10 years ago, the little girl, is a boy. He does the classic closeted straight boy thing where he becomes a complete asshole and like cusses him out and yells at him and screams and becomes just a total jerk, because closet cases are trash. We talked about this before. But then he's like, oh, I should apologize, whatever. And then he does like sexual assault. Like, yay. It's really awkward because he just starts off and then Izumi like cries and he's like, oh cool, he's crying, yes. This seems to be a theme in this anime, like whenever he cries, like people are like, I need to have sex with him right now, which is never good. That's not cool. That's terrible. So 1 and 2 are kind of good episodes. It's cute because it sets up the story and you're like, oh, everything's gonna be cool, it's gonna be cute. And I was excited. And then episode 3. Animes always have a tragic episode 3. Something messed up always happens. Madoka has a horrible episode 3. Actually, if you watch Alice in Borderland, it's not an anime, it's based off a manga. Episode 3 will mess you up. I just watched Sweet Home, the Korean show, and episode 3 also made me really upset. So episode 3 is always like the thing that's going to ruin everything. In this one, it's the first aggressive sexual assault. There are warnings that this anime doesn't really care about people's boundaries, because the older brother really has this awkward affection towards him. Whenever Izumi talks, he like hearts explode and he's like, oh, everyone, he's so cute, I love him, which is kind of like the first red flag. You're like, oh god, this Arthur is gonna make this weird. So that happens. Luckily enough, he doesn't continue because the brother steps in and stops him from going the full Monty thing, you know, praise the heavens. And he runs away, Ryoma runs away, and Izumi goes into like this horrible big depressed state. Like, he was just sexually assaulted, so he is kind of broken. And this is the first instance where like the world is kind of messed up because like no one cares. They're like, oh, you're being so dumb and sad, like move on. Even Ray, the manager, is like, he didn't go the whole way, so why do you care? It's not really assault. It's like, what? Like, you didn't go the full Monty. Like, you didn't really lose your virginity. He just took your clothes off and like touched your naked body and made you cry. Like, no, that's terrible. Like, that's not okay, bro. So, and he's like, you need to go back to work. Who cares about your feelings? And that's kind of the standard for how all the characters deal with what happens to Izumi, is like something horrible happens to him and no one cares. It's terrible. He goes back to work. They force him to go back to work. And his work is with Ryoma, so he's pretty much being forced by his family and his friends and his coworkers to stay really, really close to his assaulter. Now, Ryoma does have mixed feelings about this. He feels bad. He has his weird, like, oh my god, am I gay moment, and also like, oh my god, I sexually assaulted someone. So he does apologize, but the apology is really uncomfortable. He does like a big public apology in front of people and essentially turns it against Izumi. It's like, you should feel bad for me. I've had a hard life and I thought you were a girl and it turns out you're a boy, so it's really your fault. And there's even a line where like Izumi's like, oh my god, like it is my fault. So he guilts Izumi into being his friend and being close to him. So we have sexual assault and manipulation with a little bit of gaslighting. So it's not cool. And then his friends and family are trying really hard to help Ryoma get with Izumi or apologize. Like, they're giving him pointers. Like, this whole show is normalizing sexual assault and then also having people help the attacker instead of the victim, which, watching it again, like, I remember when I watched it the first time, I knew this was messed up, but going back on it, like, older and being like, more aware of how things are, just like how, and I think a lot of people who like this like have aggressive nostalgia glasses on. I was reading comments, and like some of the comments are like really messed up, like, oh, if you just like look past all the sexual assault, the story's really good, or like, oh, I'm really excited hearing people complain about how horrible the sexuality is treated here, it makes me want to read it more. Like, so I guess the readers and watchers also have like a big disconnect, because that's weird. So number 2 happens. Izumi is trying to be a manga artist, and in the middle of the show, I think like episode 7 or something, he tries to enter a contest and he gets destroyed. Like, he's terrible at art. Like, I also want to be like an artist and do something creative, but I'm also not that great at anything. So I really felt terrible that scene, because the guy was like, he was aggressive. He's like, what is this trash? You're horrible, go die. And then, so Azumi's a hot mess. He like falls into a dumpster in an alleyway and cries. It's raining, and he doesn't want to go back to his family because his family's horrible, and he doesn't know where to go. So he actually goes to Ryoma, which, I don't know. He has been guilt and manipulated by him earlier with like the whole blame switcheroo. So that makes sense. They have like some sort of like Stockholm syndrome situation happening, like Beauty and the Beast on Mega Drive. Like, oh, it's my fault. I'm a monster. He'll help me. Yay, toxic relationships. So he goes there, and Ryoma is on like an upward curve. He is trying, kind of, like again, he does nice things. So if they didn't have like all the sexual misconduct happening, this could be cute, because like, it's like horrible monster doing these bad things, but then also like he does nice things. So if you just cut out the monster stuff, you would just have a cute love story. And then he's showering, and Ryoma sees it, and he's like, oh god, I'm dirty again. And he tries for assault number 2, and Izumi starts crying, and he's really sad, so he just gives up. He's like, do whatever you want, I don't care about myself anymore, who cares what happens? And even though he's crying and Ryoma loves that, he stops, because, I don't know, the victim giving up is not his favorite, I don't know. But that part was really weird, and so that was like number 2. And that was like a really sad moment, because this guy, like, he just gives up. He's like, I'm not gonna fight anymore. My life is meaningless. Do what you want with my body. Which, it was so terrible. Like, there's this horror movie called Megan is Missing, and yet again, that one's really messed up too. But there's a sexual assault scene, and literally the girl's face like falls in front of the camera, and you like see the light of her eyes like leaving as it's happening to her, and that is kind of like what that scene is, except there's lots of flowers and glowing lights, and they make it romantic, even though it's like the death of his soul. So that's not cool. And the final one happens on the 9th and 10th episode at the end. And this is like the turning point where I'm like, I like wanted to drink heavily after I watched it the first time, because even when I was a kid and I watched this, I was like, holy bananas, like who was thinking this was okay? So Izumi becomes famous, which Ryoma doesn't like, because he's like, oh my god, if you're famous, other people are gonna find you cute, and then at their competition. So he like throws him against the couch, and he's like, I don't like this. And that's also kind of messed up, like, oh yeah, my bottom can't be more successful than me? I don't know. So that was also like weird. He's famous now, so people are trying to talk to him, and he runs away and goes to this back alley and sees a mugging happen. And in all the confusion, the victim runs away, and the 3 guys, and they're like in a construction yard, were like, oh my god, you're really cute, and like, we're gonna mug you. And then they find out he's a boy, but then he starts to cry, and so the 3 guys are like, oh my god, you're crying, I have to be obsessed with you too! Cool, I guess. And then, while this is happening, Azumi's like, oh my god, this feels terrible, I'm being sexually assaulted. And then his mind goes like, wow, this feels worse than when Ryoma assaults me. And then his brain goes to, oh, since this is worse, I actually probably love Ryoma. What?
Oh my god, what is that? Oh my god! What is that?
Like, that's how he figures out he loves him, is that other people sexually assault him and they feel worse. So he's like, oh my god. So he fights for survival and runs away and goes back to Ryuma's arms and like, oh my god, And like he doesn't say anything, like he just completely forgets that just happened and goes like, oh my god, I love you, I kiss you, and then like let's have sex. That was weird. So these three instances, and how everyone, like nobody talks about this, and there are at least his brother and his manager are aware of this. I think his mom and dad are also aware of this, but they just don't care. Like, Call Me by Your Name, where the mom at the end is like, I know they're banging the whole time. I really don't like that movie too, by the way, but I digress. But like a lot of people know about this, and no one asks him how he feel. No one's trying to help him, and no one's trying to get Ryoma away from him. They're like pushing them closer because the business is what matters. So it's a mess. It's terrible. I don't like when that happens. I think no one should like that. It's really messed up. There's only 3 situations where I think like sexual assault, it should be in a show. Number 1, there are negative impacts for the assaulter. Like, it's something that happens, so it will end up in media. Like, bad things happen, murder, crimes always happen. But it shouldn't be romanticized. So if it happens and there are negative consequences for the person who did it, then that should be acceptable. Like, it's a bad thing, and people shouldn't be like, oh, he did that, but he's really handsome, so it's okay. Like, no. So there's negative consequences. Number 2, this is like a really weird one, but if there's like a rape fantasy fetish involved, where both people involved are okay with this situation, and in the media they both explicitly say, hey, I want this and I'm okay with it, then it's just the action of it, because people do like that. It's still weird, but if both people are in the group, or more than both, I don't know how many, all the people involved are like okay with what's happening and that's something they want, then that's okay. But you need to make it clear, probably before and after, that this is something that was agreed upon, and that's probably still won't be everyone's cup of tea, but at least it's not romanticizing it and no one's being destroyed by it. It's like something they want. People have their things, live your dream, but hopefully that's not super popular. And then number 3, which is one that I'm also so on, but like a dream sequence. So it's a dream, no one is really hurt, but it's still really awkward to see. And if the person likes it, then it kind of makes the character seem a little sketchy. But it's a dream sequence, so there's no victim. But I'm still like iffy on that one. But when I was thinking of this, I was like, that one's kind of okay. At least it's a dream. And usually when the person who has the dream wakes up, they're like, oh my god, that's not good. And they have like the appropriate reaction of like, ugh. So those are only 3 ones where I'm like, this is kind of okay. The first one is like the only one where it's like, that's 100% okay because it's negative. This anime doesn't fit any of these. It's romanticized, it's helped, and they do not care about the victim at all, and that's not okay. There's actually a Thai show called The Effect, which people seem to really like. It's only 3 episodes long. I haven't watched it yet because I'm afraid it will make me really sad. But apparently it's the effect of this situation, and it talks about all the negative consequences. So I really need to watch this and see what's going on with that, because I think that'd be like one of the first times where I've seen in a BL where like a sexual assault actually has a negative impact on people's life. One of the things about this is the live action one has Kitty Pat, who is from Tarn Type. And Tarn Type, season 1, I haven't seen season 2 yet. That one's just a clusterfuck of messiness, but there are at least 3 instances of sexual assault in that one, all handled very terribly. And so it's kind of sad that Kitty Pat is part of that, and then he's going to be like the main role, and I think he's actually playing Ryoma, which is like the assaulter. So I really liked his acting. He was really good in Tarn Type, so I hope they cut that out. So like I want him to get like in a better role where he can be in something really cool, because I liked him. So even though there are some good things about it, and without the sexual assault this would have been a normal show, this one gets a 1 out of 10. Like, this is embedded in my mind as like the textbook example of like what can go wrong on a gay show. It's just like the story is okay, but like nothing can kind of take away from that situation where like every single episode talks about the assault or brings it up, and it handles it terribly. All the characters handle it terribly. The parents are horrible. Like Ray talks about being gay, and they kind of like equate like being gay to sexual assault. Like, oh, we're both guys, and guys love sex, so it's never a bad thing. That's just how people do when they're gay. and like it just kind of normalizes like bad ideas about gay people, and also like it kind of like empowers the assaulters and takes power away from the victims. Like there's just like a lot of bad ideas here. Yet again, I'm gonna say like I really don't think the author had bad intentions when writing this, but it was probably just like I said, that time period a lot of BLs had things like this. Like it's very common for BLs to use sexual assault as something to like get the two boys together, because they can't like, I don't know, do anything else that happens in any romance ever. It has to be like, hey, we got drunk, or hey, you were passed out, so I decided to have sex with you, and like 4 years later you realized you liked it. Like there always be like a weird concept where like one person is attacking, and since you need like the top and bottom mechanic always, the top has to be like, I'm aggressive and manly, so I must do this upon you, and you must say no because you're the bottom, and you have to be really chaste. So that's really awkward. So yeah, this is a 1 out of 10. I can't really recommend this show. It's not good. If you have problems with sexual assault, you should definitely not watch it. There are much better things out there anyways. Yuri on Ice. Watch Yuri on Ice. It's pure, it's good, the animation's great, the soundtrack is great, and no one gets assaulted. So I hope the live action does get rid of all that stuff, because you could have a cute anime. Like Ryoma does do some really cute stuff towards the end. Like he gets a manga illustrated and signed for Izumi. Like he does a lot of nice things, but none of those nice things outweigh the horrible thing he did. So yeah. On a happier note, I finished Color Rush. That show was amazing. I'm changing my schedule around. I'm gonna do Color Rush next because holy bananas, that was a good show. It's small and perfect and cute, and I can't wait to talk about it with you guys, because I said this before, like I'm colorblind, and so a show about colorblind people and it being like interesting and kind of sci-fi and fantasy, I really liked it. So I can't wait to talk about that. I got back into Game Boys. I went on break and I got to episode 7, I think, and that one's like the really sad one, and I cried way too much. Yeah, that was upsetting. Manner of Death, it's getting close to the end, I think, and the drama is really intense right now. People die. There's great kissing scenes. It's a really cool story. It's a thriller, and I like that concept. And like I said earlier, number 1 for You, the new Taiwanese show. I didn't think it was gonna be that good, but like it's really good. Though I was really into it, and then episode 2 has like a kind of like pseudo blackmail thing, where one of the characters like, oh, you have to be my slave, or I'll show them this video of you being sad, and it kind of puts him at disadvantage. And I don't think he was actually going to do that, but like the idea, especially in like a gay thing, always makes me nervous. Like, oh my god, we're going down this route again. There's going to be rape probably later. There's going to be sexual assault later probably. Oh gosh. But it's really good. The actor's great. It's from Taiwan, so you know it's going to be amazing. Yeah. So, thank you for watching. Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, wear your mask. This one, I only have one up, so I'm not going to tie it, but don't forget to wear your mask, and I'll see you next week. Bye. Oh, thank you for watching. Bye.